Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we mark today, day 544 since the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates committed the atrocities of October 7th of 2023, it's important to note that at this point in time, the situation in the Gaza Strip is that the IDF is intensifying and broadening its offensive operations on the ground to include, indeed, a ground maneuver in addition to tensions in the Persian Gulf, in the Horn of Africa, and in Syria as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today, to include Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, formerly the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff and Israel Air Force Commander, as well as a fighter pilot. Next to him, retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. And last but not least, Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at the Mossad Intelligence Agency, as well as a senior officer at the IDF's Intelligence Directorate. And it's great to see all three of you. And I'd like to start with you, General Kimmett, if I may. The Chinese Foreign Ministry released a statement, and also subsequently its Foreign Ministry spokesman came out and highlighted that they're calling upon the United States to accept that sanctions and coercion and pressure will not help it when it comes to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it should go back to the 2015 nuclear agreement, namely the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and accept it the way it is, irrespective, of course, and stopping short from mentioning that the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi has already voiced that piece of document as obsolete.
Well, I think it's important to recognize that President Joe Biden tried to do exactly that when he took over. In fact, one of the things that Joe Biden ran on in 2019, was returning to the JCPOA. I'd remind your viewers that, in fact, it was the Iranians that refused to renegotiate. They said, oh, no, if you want to come back in, we don't want the same agreement we had before. We're going to start from square one. And then when we discussed that issue with them, we, the United States, they just completely backed out of the negotiations. So I think China probably should be directing those comments not at the United States, which remains willing to renegotiate and to come back into the JCPOA, but talk to the Iranians who, up to this point, every time it is offered, it is rejected by Iran.
Yeah, but General Kimmett, that would be counterproductive to its strategy of vilifying the United States over anything and everything. And putting that in context, naturally, all of, or 90% of all sanctioned oil and other energy products coming out of the Islamic Republic naturally find the final designation in China. Is that not something that, of course, should be brought into context in this? And to what degree do you think that the current, I wouldn't call it a standoff, but the current situation between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran will, of course, bring China into the mix in one form or another?
Well, 2 points. First of all, you're right. China is actually trying to look out for China. It has no real care about international peace, international security. But I think China recognizes that the next step in the maximum pressure campaign is to cut off supplies of Iranian oil and choking the Iranian economy. The major one to lose from that, of course, is the Chinese, who are so dependent upon Iranian oil. So I think it's always interesting to hear the views of other countries and listen carefully to the advice of other countries, and dismiss that which has a completely different agenda than what is said.
Naturally. Well, General Sofrin, I'd like to ask you to give us a little bit of context, since the Russians are, of course, eager to protect the Islamic Republic, which has been one of its greatest suppliers, both of unmanned aerial vehicles as well as other components to munitions, which it requires for its ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine. To what degree is that within the current calculus taking into account the heightened state of tensions between the United States alongside Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran?
I think that we have to look at the relations between Russia and between Iran as a strategic alliance. It's not something that should be undermined. It's strategic alliance. That means we look at each other face to face, eye to eye, and we see everything in coordination. That means that first of all, Iran supported Russia in its what we call darkest hours, when they didn't have any weapons to attack or the depth of Ukraine, and they supplied the weapon systems and the knowledge to establish a new facility to produce their own kamikaze UAVs based on the Iranian planning, of course, and the Iranian, of course, knowledge that will be transferred to Russia. The second issue is that they supplied probably long-range missiles, ballistic missiles to the Russians as well, because they didn't have enough out of themselves. Now, in return, the Russians are now selling them advanced weapons, advanced aircraft, Su-35, that should have been delivered to Egypt, but Egypt
Not the 35, the Su-57.
This deal because of the American pressure and so on. And therefore, now it is being supplied to Iran, and of course, weapon systems, other weapon systems like anti-aircraft batteries and so on. So this is a strategic alliance, and I won't believe that if something is going to happen to Iran, that the Russians will stand aside and clap their hands. They will try to participate. They will try to reduce the ability of somebody to attack Iran and to cause damage, and to try to ease the tensions as best as they can.
Of course, the Russians would not face or have a standoff with the Americans in any case, and would only get involved so long as there is some type of deniability. You misspoke about the Sukhoi. It's the Su-57, not the 35. And when we're talking about the relations when we're talking about the relations between China and Russia and Iran. There was quite an interesting situation when Israel struck Iran on the 26th or 27th of April. We saw that subsequently, at least according to friends in the United States, if I may call them, they told me that, Iran actually subsequently went to the Russians and said, please resupply us with additional S-300s and S-400s. And the Russians said no. What does that say?
I'm not familiar with that. I don't believe that the Russians said no, definitely, but maybe not S-400 or S-300, but other as well. Maybe they've been supplied, and we don't know about it. At least I don't know, and I'm not sure that this is the answer. And I don't believe that the Russians will stand aside and will not help the Iranians. Let's say, if you look back at what we call the very close history, the Russians didn't help Bashar Assad to stay in power in Syria. They will not go back to the same mistake with Iran, because they need Iran as part of their strategic alliance together with China and North Korea. And I won't believe that this time they will stay aside like they did with Bashar Assad.
Right, but that wasn't for lack of effort. It was due to not having the capabilities in place, and the Iranians being frustrated by Israel when they intended, of course, to deploy roughly 4,000 terror operatives to Syria in order to support the Assad regime's defense against a push by Jaish al-Watani, alongside, of course, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. But General Rosen, I'd like to ask you from an Air Force perspective. The Iranians have an Air Force. It might not be an advanced Air Force, which is an understatement, of course, aircraft from the 60s and 70s, but nonetheless, they tried to establish some type of parameter, and their most potent component of that Air Force is namely their unmanned aerial vehicles, one way at that, the Shahed 136 and other type of munitions. And they promise that in the event that the United States would strike at them, be it the United States alone or together with Israel, most probably, they will not stand idly by and they will seek to strike any American target in the region, to include also the state of Israel.
Yeah, we're seeing in the last decade, and it expanded very much in the war in Ukraine, how air power and utilization of small aircrafts is changing the battlefield. From how you counter tanks all the way to how you strike strategic targets, whether it's energy or bases or whatnot. The large military systems are still in place and still very active, airplanes and air defense and all these things, but now you have a few layers of battlefields, low flying, mid-level flying, high flying, and the defense systems that are trying to cope with that. And it's a much more sophisticated battlefield that we have today. Iran is very good in deploying employing a battlefield that is very hard for regular militaries to operate in, and that's exactly the battlefield we're seeing in Ukraine in a huge effort. Both sides are building masses and swarms of UAVs, drones, and all this battlefield is now exploding globally. Everybody's looking at it. It's a huge experiment in a battlefield which is expanding defense technology worldwide. The Chinese are looking at it vis-a-vis Taiwan. Everybody is looking at this as battlefields really transform and turn into a very different battlefield that we saw just a decade and a half ago, maybe. If you go back to the discussion you had about Iran, the relationship between Iran and Russia, it's feeding both ways, and both sides have limits and interests that are a little bit different because of each side. There's the Middle East perspective. There are shared goals and common adversaries in the Middle East, opposition to the US and Israeli influence in the region, military alignment in Syria. Russia wants to continue to have its stronghold on the western side of Syria. Israel doesn't want things to change. And I'm putting aside Turkey for a second. You have weapon systems cooperation. Russia provides the air defense systems that you mentioned. Does it resupply or not the Syrians? Energy coordination, the competition with OPEC and other things, support for proxies, et cetera, et cetera. That's one thing, the regional, the Middle East. The second thing is the war in Ukraine, which I mentioned. There's a huge, both ways need to cooperate. What Iran perfected over decades of isolation, Russia is now learning on the fly in Ukraine, just to counter what the Ukrainians are doing to them, and they need it. And there's the global strategic alignment, the anti-Western bloc formation. BRICS, the BRICS nations are trying to create something that will counter the dollar and build a non-dollar trade system to challenge the hegemony of the global dollar system. That is something which is not good for the maximum pressure campaign. And of course, the West will defend that. Defense industrial cooperation, all these things are one bloc against another bloc. So we're in a very multipolar world now, and it's not necessarily yet dominated, but I think that the new administration, the US administration, is doing things that will hopefully fortify the dominance of the United States and its allies.
General Kimmel, I'd like you to respond to both points just made briefly, and then draw from that into the Yemeni theater, where we hear the Ayatollah regime highlighting that it will not allow the Houthis to just crumble and fall, but rather will stand by them. How is that actually going to take effect in practice is a big question mark.
Well, on the second point about Iran and the Houthis, that's probably the second announcement in as many weeks that about Iranian policy, which was 180 degrees different. As you know, about 2 to 3 weeks ago, the Iranians said, we tried to get the Houthis to knock it off. They wouldn't. We're working with them, but they've got strategic autonomy on their own. Now, Iran is shifting its tone and saying, we're not going to let them go by the wayside. The fact remains is the only way that Iran can truly help is by getting in the IRGC advisors and getting in equipment. And it is certainly the case that the West is trying to do its best to stop both. So I see that last announcement as somewhat a bluster. Now, the issue about the relationship between Russia and Iran, I think this administration in the United States sees it not necessarily as a strategic alliance, but as a transactional alliance, that they have nothing in common culturally, they have nothing in common historically, and that this conundrum, not this condominium that they've come to recently, is one of mutual need. You've got the missiles. I mean, you need the missiles. I've got the drones, so on and so forth. I mention that because if you look at this in the view of a transactional relationship, I think the Trump administration is trying to fundamentally offer Russia a better deal. That's why there seems to be some, what some would say, a almost coddling of Putin when it comes to the war in Iran, willing to toss Zelensky under the bus. No, I actually think, and people call me crazy, but I think that there's someone that has a vision in mind, a grand vision for a deal that not only, and I think we've talked about it here, where Russia becomes more aligned with the United States against the interests of Iran, and in return helps us out in Ukraine, and in return a weaker Iran also helps the whole issue of pushing the Abraham Accords even further. I certainly hope people are strategically thinking that way, because of the best outcome when it comes to Russia and Iran, and candidly in Russia in general, is if we can pull Russia away from the Chinese in a reverse of what was done in 1972 by Kissinger when he pulled the Chinese away from the Russians. Maybe I'm thinking too broadly on this and unrealistically, but I don't believe that Russia and Iran have a permanent alliance, but rather a transactional alliance that when the transactions no longer benefit, the relationship and alliance may not be there.
Well, I don't think you're far off, since the Kissingerian approach of decoupling Russia from China, of course, similar to what he did in 72, is indeed what is being talked about within many administration officials, and that is and people surrounding that. So there is a chatter, at least, or a discourse on this matter in a very deliberate way, and it seems that there's somewhat skepticism in other nations as well with regard to whether or not that it's viable, considering the interoperability, particularly between China and Russia. Now, decoupling Iran from Russia would be less difficult than Moscow and Beijing. Those are two different levels. I don't think that Russia, albeit a secondary actor next to the Chinese, is feeling as a secondary actor, and therefore working extensively to save the third rank actor, namely the Islamic Republic of Iran, would not necessarily be in its interest. But nonetheless, General Sofrin, I'd like to ask you particularly about the Yemeni file, since Ansar Allah has been trying extensively to launch attacks against Israel in the last 48 hours and failed to do so, which indicates that the American strikes are being quite effective.
I'm not sure that this is dependent on the American attacks, even though the American attacks has its own effect, but they try to, from the beginning of the renewed war in Gaza, they tried to launch 14 times missiles into Israel. that were intercepted on the way, part of them by the US, part of them by us, but nevertheless, none of them hit Israel. And this is not because of the American strikes or not, even though it may reduce the quantity of missiles that have been launched from Yemen into Israel, but nevertheless, they keep on trying, and they keep on trying to annoy Israel and the Israelis and to try to block or to interrupt the international flights that are coming into Israel, just like they try to isolate or to try to avoid or deny any vessel, Israeli vessel, to get into the Red Sea towards Eilat, or even other vessels that are trying to get to Eilat port, to deny them from getting there. Now they try to do the same and try to hit the area of Ben Gurion Airport in order to disrupt the international flights coming in. Now, they don't succeed, fortunately for all of us, of course, because they can cause damage. But nevertheless, they keep on trying and they don't give up. And as I mentioned before in one of our discussions, I believe that the only strikes from the air will not be enough. If you want to put them or get them down to on their knees and wave a white flag, you have to have boots on the ground, and nobody intends right now to do so. So it's going to be an ongoing strikes, and they will try to react, and they will get renewed supply of weapon systems coming out from the Iranians, and they will try to hit Saudi Arabia, and they will try to hit the Emirates to cause damage like they did before several times, and of course to try to strike Israel with another missiles.
Indeed. Well, I completely agree with what you just highlighted. Airstrikes alone will not do the job. There needs to be a concerted effort, both either boots on the ground, but there are other types of boots on the ground, namely special operators, to operate to ensure the decoupling between the Houthi tribe with the other tribes and then bolstering the opposing tribes to basically push back on the Iranian proxy, Ansar Allah. But General Hossein, we don't have very much time left, and I'd like still to touch particularly also on the Gazan front. A ground operation is expanding now, particularly also in the town of Rafah, but also on the northern part and central Gaza. Hamas is feeling the heat, but nonetheless, we don't see a breakthrough in the talks.
Yeah, there's a huge debate whether it is wise to push Hamas even further. And of course, what's on the table are the lives of the hostages from Israel's part. That's one side. And the other part is Hamas's future. Now, one story is, can we get the hostages back by applying more military pressure? The other story is, we're going to apply military pressure and see what happens. I'm not sure which version is the better version of the future. What we need to be cognizant of is that right now, Hamas is almost beaten and gone. Okay, but that's not enough if you have such expensive or valuable, better to say, valuable cards in your hands, which are the hostages. So Israel needs to very, very delicately but powerfully create the perception on Hamas's side that they are about to capitulate. And this, I think, is because 10, 20% are left. This will take about a month or so. And I'm just roughly saying this because I don't know exactly how much of them are left. And we need to do it in a very, very smart way in order to break how they're holding the hostages and to create the feeling on their side that they better start negotiating with their valuable cards before they completely lose everything. If we do it a little bit too much, we're going to lose everything. And that's not something Israel wants.
Well, risk assessments are at play here, and hopefully wisdom will prevail when it comes to this. But it's hard to deal with evil at this level. Before the end of the program, I will want to touch on just one point that has not specifically to do with Israel, but nonetheless is very important on a regional scale. Operation Inherent Resolve has eliminated yet again the leader of the Islamic State. A statement was brought out or published by Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, the Iraqi prime minister, and his foreign minister made that also a public statement in his public address alongside his HTS counterpart who visited from Syria. General Kimmett, in 3 sentences, 2.5 sentences, what can you tell us about that?
Got to mow the grass. Kill one of the leaders, another one will come up. We just got to keep mowing the grass when they do.
Indeed, which also amplifies the importance of the presence of U.S. Special operators in the region, as well as the American influence that is a good force in the Middle East to confront the threat of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. At least that's their aspiration. And also to point out that we are seeing also the deployment of additional Turkish forces, both in the direction of Damascus and Tadmo, particularly the T4 airbase there, where the Turks have already deployed surface-to-air missiles. So we will continue to keep an eye on those developments. But nonetheless, I'd like to thank General Sofrin, General Rosen, and General Kimmett for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
Shalom, I'm Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy foreign minister and member of Knesset. Today, I'm very privileged to be hosting TV7's Middle East Review and also being a panelist of the various shows of TV7, which I find the most enlightening, most educating if you really want to understand the world, the global scene as well as the regional scene of the Middle East. It is worthwhile to watch TV7.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.